Welcome. My name is Caleb Schlater and I get the opportunity to work within the product support team here at Precision Planting. I want to welcome all of the growers watching this, both from North America and around the world, to our first virtual operators clinic. Now, this virtual operators clinic was built as a tool to be able to connect to growers and equip them with the tools to be successful in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has undoubtedly impacted everyone that is watching this video, and it has caused disruption in how we typically equip our growers heading into and during the planting season. Now, this has given us an opportunity to innovate how we share information to live up to our commitment at Precision Planting, which is to continue to find new and innovative ways to help farmers succeed with their planting and harvesting operations, whether they have our equipment or not. Now, in addition to this tool, the Precision Planting team has other means to provide information. In the bio of this video, below this screen, you're going to see 3 links. The first link is for our product support text message program. Now, these text messages are a great way to stay informed on precision planting equipment, and our team will directly send you videos that can be a great tool that you can access at any time to assist and guide you through our products. That link will take you to a form to register into that program. The second link is to go to the Precision Planting Product Support YouTube channel. This is where we house all of our videos so you have easy access to that content. And then the third link down there is the Precision Planting Cloud. This is a resource that provides an immense amount of information, including operators manuals and troubleshooting. Now, these tools are highly valuable, and we wanted to make them easily accessible so you can reference them during your season. Now, this virtual operator clinic is being hosted with a live chat feature, which our team at Precision Planting is monitoring. If you have a question, please place that in the chat on the left side of the screen, and the Precision Planting team will respond with an answer to that question. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Precision Planting's Eric Huber, and he's going to be your guide for the Precision Planting's virtual operators clinic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Huber. I'm one of the regional managers for Precision Planting and a little part of East Central Illinois. Thanks for joining me today. I want to take some time to walk through and just give you a refresher of the 2020 seed sense. One of the more common comments that we will get from growers as employees at Precision is, well, it's easy for you guys because you think about this every day. We only use this thing for a couple weeks out of the year maybe, and so it really helps to get updated on an annual basis so that we remember how to operate, how to use that piece of equipment as we go. So that's the plan for the day here as we walk through this meeting. I want to start off with a few grower resources to begin with. As much as we can, we want to try to empower you as operators with pertinent information. If you can get it at the touch of a button on your phone or your iPad while you're in the cab to help you get there. Obviously, our product support team is on hand. But here's a few things for you to be aware of. I'll walk through a list and then I'll show you these quickly as well. The first is cloud.precisionplanting.com. There is a wealth of information available to you as growers just at the click of a button. It can be accessed via your computer or on an iPad or a smartphone. And as you go to that site, this is also where you'll go to find those software downloads. Info.precisionplanting.com. This is a new trial for us. We're calling this a beta. You can give us your contact information, your cell phone number, and if you would like, we will send you videos that are pertinent to the products that you have on your planter a couple of times a week as we get closer to this planting season. So the idea is these would be frequently asked questions, and we will send those directly to your phone so that you can watch them on your own time for the products that you have on your particular machine. Inside PTI is more of an agronomy resource. I'll show you what that is in just a moment. And then most importantly is your local premier dealer. Hopefully you already have a relationship with your local premier dealer, but say you purchased a planter used and it had precision planting equipment on it and you're wondering who's the guy in my area that really knows this stuff. www.precisionplanting.com, go to our dealer locator, enter in a zip code, and that will get you in touch with a local expert to help you with your equipment. So let me show you a couple of these sites very quickly. Let me back out here. This is cloud.precisionplanting.com. When you type that into your web browser, you'll have the opportunity to click on product resources, and it will bring you to this page. And there is a wealth of information on any of the products that you might own right here on this site. And just to show you specifically, we're going to be going through a Gen 3 monitor specifically today. Very similar for metrics and setup as a Gen 1, Gen 2, so we want to make this pertinent to both users. We're just going to use the Generation 3 as our platform to teach today. If I click on that category and I go to Operation Resources, you'll see a drop down here for 2020 Display Operation Resources. And there are a variety of different video tutorials on commonly asked questions, system setup, systems operations, how to assign prescriptions. And right down here is a quick reference guide. I would greatly encourage this one to be downloaded. This is a great visual document that walks through almost any button that you can imagine in that 2020 and explains what it is, what the metric means, as well as an operator's guide. So cloud.precisionplanting.com, a great resource. info@precisionplanting.com, this is where that page will take you. Enter your name, your phone number, tell us what products you have, and if you'd like, we would text you those pertinent videos to your setup. And then last is Inside PTI. So PTI is the Precision Technology Institute. Jason Webster is our commercial agronomist at the farm. He puts in many, many plots every single year. This is a 320-acre farm, I believe. And all of the plots that he does, he's working through putting those results into videos so that you don't just get a sheet of paper with results, but you get the context of what the plot was and why the results were what they were. So you can put in your first name and an email address, and a couple times a week we will send you a short video with pertinent agronomic information. So some great resources there for you to be aware of. The next thing I want to walk through is software updates. So I'm going to come back to this cloud.precisionplanting.com because this is where you're going to access that software. You'll notice these two gray arrows over to the left-hand side of the screen. The lower left-hand side will bring out 2020 Seed Sense downloads. Click there, and this will bring up, they'll actually be collapsed when you first come in. You'll see software for Generation 2 and 1, and you'll see software updates for Generation 3. Couple quick notes. Generation 1 monitors, if you click that drop down, the last software that was written for that monitor was 2017.4 software, and you will see that current version of Generation 1 software, and you can download that right here. Generation 2, you can update to 2020.0.0, and that is right here. You do not want to download the boot version of software. That is for diagnostic purposes or service purposes down the road. So you'll want to download that current version of software for your display. Now, a quick explanation on whether you have a Gen 1 or a Gen 2. A Gen 1 has two USB ports on the left-hand side of the screen. A Gen 2 has one on the side, on the left-hand side, and it has three in the rear. So that's the way that you would distinguish between those two. For a generation 3, you're going to click right here, and 2020.0.0 software. Again, you want this top one right here for your software download. Once you have downloaded that software, it will end up in the downloads folder in your computer software, or in your computer file explorer rather. So a couple things to look at very quickly. You'll see DU Gen 2 update. This is your Gen 2 update. Your 2020 Gen 3 will read just like this. Now, if you notice up above, here's another Gen 2 update. It's the same file, but it's got this parentheses 1. The reason you see this here is because that's the second time that that same file has been downloaded. If you see a parentheses and a 1 or a 2 behind that software download, you want to find the original and use that one, or if you can't find it, you need to rename this by clicking right in here, and you would delete out the parentheses and the 1. Now, it's not going to let me save that because I've already got the file in here, but something to be aware of. You need just that file name. There should not be any number behind it. You're going to take that, you're going to pull it into a USB that would be plugged into the computer, and save it to the root directory. Very simply, that means do not save it into a folder on the USB stick, or else the display will not be able to recognize that software update. Once you have the software on the USB stick, you're going to come to your display, plug that USB into the side of the display. You're going to go to Setup. You will go to Data, Import, software update down here. And then you're going to go install from a USB. Now, I don't have a USB plugged in, so it's not going to see it. When you click on that, it should come up. You should see that 2020.0.0 software. You hit OK. That will go through. It will process the software. Then a pop-up is going to come up that says the software download is complete. Please remove the USB stick from the monitor and hit OK. And it's going to reboot and get that software started on the monitor. Once you have software updated, the next thing that I want to stress is that a 2020 display was not ever meant to be a long-term storage device. So that means we need to delete out previous season's data so we don't fill up the hard drive and make the monitor sluggish. The way that we do that is we will go to Setup. You'll go to Data. The first thing you want to do is export and save the data. So we'll go to Export, and we're going to go to Field Map Data. You can come in, select all fields, and you'll click Transfer to a USB stick. It will take some time for all that data to transfer over. Once the transfer is complete and you've saved it to your computer and verified that it is safely saved on your computer, from your home screen, you will go to Setup, Data, Delete, Field Map Data. And you can click on Select All Fields and delete all of those selected fields. That's going to be sure that we don't fill up the hard drive of that monitor and eventually start to affect the performance because it doesn't have any more space to write the new data to. One other note for Gen 1 and Gen 2 monitors is you will want to delete out the previous season's coverage map data. That coverage map data is what you see on the screen right here. And that is recording wherever we've dropped seed in that field. So if you do not delete old coverage map data, you come to behind Garth's irrigator, this particular field here, and you try to plant again, it's going to say it's already planted, and therefore will not allow the seed to come out because it'll be swathed off. So the way that you would delete that, you would go to Setup, Data, Delete, And then you'll see old coverage map data. That does not apply to generation 3s. That will clear out automatically based off of the time and date of where we are at. So a few important things really to start off with as we begin. So let's talk first of all, why does all of this matter? Why are we so concerned about this? And so I want to come back to the basics for just a moment. And this is regardless of the crop. Just a minute, some technical difficulties, my apologies. Wrong slide. Regardless of the crop that we're planting, I'm going to talk corn for a moment, but really these principles apply for sugar beets or sunflowers, or it could be cotton. We know that the planting pass is what is establishing the yield potential later on down the road. So when I think about a corn crop, I know between that V4 to V6 stage, at V6, we've already determined the total number of kernels in girth and the total number of possible kernels in length. And so we want to make sure that the planter pass is not limiting that potential. So we look at a few different potential errors when it comes to corn, and there's a different cost to each one of those. Spacing errors. Each ear and 1/1000th of an acre, we're going to figure is 7 bushels. That's industry average. If I have a spacing error and I am slightly misplaced, that's going to cost me roughly 1/10 of an ear because I get plant-to-plant competition and one plant shields the other plant out just a bit and we lose about 1/10. A severely misplaced seed will cost me about 2/10 of an ear. For singulation, if I have a double, that costs me 4/10 of an ear, and we figure a skip costs about 8/10 of an ear. And the reason it's not 10/10 of an ear is because the plants on either side will flex a little bit in their ear capability normally because of a little extra sunlight and water and resources. And the most costly is this emergence piece. If we come up at different times and we are one leaf stage behind the neighboring plants, I've got a plant at V3 and its neighbors are at 4, we figure 5/10 of an ear loss. And in LE2, we figure that's about 8/10 of an ear loss to a full ear loss at that point. And so what we want to stress is as that planter goes through the field, we are setting the potential for the rest of the season, and we want to get it done correctly. The way that we avoid these mistakes is by having information in real time to help us operate that planter to its greatest potential so that we can avoid finding out the mistake was caused later and fix it in stride. So with that being said, I want to come back to the 2020 screen and just do a quick reminder on how to keep this process very simple when it comes to interpreting the data on a 2020. I always like to think of this as number 1, it's a traffic signal. Number 2, there's only 3 levels of screens and you can't get lost. Here's what I mean by that. This is a level 1 screen. Green means go, yellow means caution, so I can see under singulation. Low row is 9 at 98%. That's saying, hey, you might want to look at this. And if anything's red, it's saying, hey, look here. And so I can see delta force, it says it's not present. My demonstration's being just a little bit goofy. You'll see that, I'm sure, through the presentation as the demo's never quite perfect like reality, but it is trying to flag my attention to say, hey, there's a real problem here. You need to evaluate this. The second thing to note is that there are 3 levels of screens that you can dive into to try to make the information simple to understand. So let the color draw your eye in, and I'm going to look at singulation, let's say. This is the average singulation of all of the rows on the planter. Same for population or for SRI, which is our spacing reading right down here. These are all averages for the entire planter's worth of sensors. If I click on one metric, that will bring me to a level 2 screen. This says rows 1 through 16. in singulation, overall are doing fairly well, but I can see row 5 very quickly is drawing my eye in because it's yellow. It's got skips and just a couple doubles. If I want more information on row 5, I can click on row 5, and now I have row-specific details to help me understand exactly what's going on with that row and to help me see if there's any way to remedy that. So I can see the rate, I can see skips and doubles, load pin information, what my skips and doubles are right down here. And it gives me the ability to quickly visualize how accurate that pass is while in the midst of that pass. So what's very important about this, and we'll talk about this more later, is by using those 3 levels of screens, we can go in and begin to diagnose problems quickly and optimize how well that planter is operating in real time. So before I dive into the metrics in more detail, I want to put you back in the tractor seat just for a moment. So picture that you pulled into that field entrance, the planter's unfolded, it's filled with seed, you have the fertilizer that you're ready to apply set in that planter. How do we remember what we're supposed to set up? And how do we make sure that we don't forget anything? And we can do that by asking a few simple questions. So 4 questions. Number 1 is, what am I? And that's going to refer to your planner configuration and setup. Number 2 is, where am I? So what field am I in? And how do I make sure not to forget to make that field active so the data is stored in the right spot? What am I planting? That's going to refer to the crop, the hybrid, the variety that we're entering. And then how much am I planting or applying? And that's going to refer to the population set points or the liquid set points that you're going to execute. So let's walk through those questions. What am I? Where am I? What am I planting? And how much am I planting? Just to help us get back into the tractor cab. So I'm going to go to Setup. And I'm going to change my demonstration here just a moment, so bear with me so I can make my screen look a little bit more normal to what your screen would look like. I'm going to come into my planter, my demo, I'm a multi-hybrid meter. I'm going to come just to a simple V drive. So I'm planting 1 hybrid at a time. Okay. So the first question, what am I? And that is going to refer to this planter and to this equipment tab. So when you come under planter, and most of this hopefully is already set up, you've done this with your dealer, or you've used the operations manual. Make is a deer, 16 row, 30 inches. Active rows are all. The effective row spacing is 30 inches, and the effective planter width is 40 feet. Now, a quick explanation on these. The number of rows and the spacing refers to how many total rows are on that planter when all of them are being used. So where this really applies is if you have a planter that has split rows on it. So you could do 30-inch corn and 15-inch beans, for instance, a 1790, a case 1240, 1245, a Kinsey with pusher units on it, all 3 of those. If I've got a 1632, I would want 32 rows here, and I would want my spacing to be 15 inches. This is what the planter actually is when all of the rows are actively being used. The active rows are what the system is looking for based off of the crop that you have selected. And I'll give you an example of that in a little bit to see how this changes. But active rows should be all. Effective row spacing, this is the width or the row spacing width that we are using to determine the population when we compare it to speed and seed pulses. The effective planter width is what we're using to calculate acres that have been covered. So you want to make sure that this matches what's actually back behind you and is attached at that pivot point. Over to the right-hand side, you'll see your planter measurements. These are important to be set properly because this is what's going to determine whether or not we correctly are modeling where the seed is being placed and in how that planter is steering through the field. So it can come into my frame type. You can see single, dual front. This is for your Kinseys, your center trailing, or your dual rears for your 1790s, your 1240s, etc. Your hitch style. Are you drawn or are you a 2-point pivot? We want to make sure that this is in correctly. So I'm going to say this is a 2-point pivot. And then you're going to enter in your varying lengths to your different spots. So A is your wheel distance, B is your furthest forward rank of seating rows, and C is the furthest rear seating rows. Then you can input your tractor measurements as well. And we're telling the system, where is that globe located at? This globe is receiving raw GPS coordinates into it, and then it needs to know how to model where that seed is dropping by inputting these different measurements back to your wheelbase and to your seating exits. I'll touch on GPS offsets check in a little while, but ultimately what I want you to see here is you can come to frame layout, and this frame layout should match reality. So let me show you what happens if this is incorrect. I can come back to my planner measurements, and let's say this center distance C, right now it's in at 246. What happens if I enter 226? Or better yet, what happens if I just forget to enter that number altogether? When I come to my frame layout, can see that this does not match reality at all. That throws a red flag very quickly that says this will not model correctly. It will not swath on and off correctly, and I need to make sure to get that fixed. So I'm going to come back to my planner measurements. Let's call this 226. This should also not be correct, but let me show you what that would do. Now these 4 rows that should be center trailing are actually shifted forward. If I come in and I put in the correct measurement, and go to my frame layout, now I see that this is modeled correctly. So what am I is answered by going to setup and verifying that your planner is set up correct, that your measurements and your tractor measurements are correct. Obviously, after the first field in this GPS offsets check that we'll talk about a little bit later, you won't have to worry about it beyond that point, but you will always want to verify that your tractor and planner setup is correct under that planner profile. Where am I? The where am I refers to making the correct field active. So a quick glance at this setup page. This is the first page you come to after you click on setup. And this is a real quick overview of anything that you have active on that planter. So right now it says in the upper left that I'm behind Garth's irrigator. That's the field name. I'm a 40-foot wide, 16-row John Deere center trailing planter. And then you can see these different rows right here where you see this caution symbol. This is your diagnose page. This is linked to this diagnose page right here. In my demo, obviously things are not quite right. And it's indicating that what you would want to see ideally here is this should be solid green all the way across. This seed icon indicates whether or not I have a hybrid active in that planter. And the drop here, this is my liquid. So do I have starter or nitrogen or some other type of liquid that I'm applying? That would show up in a row here. And the color indicates that something is assigned. Now, to the where, I can click on this field. You can see client, farm. The active field right here is behind Garth's irrigator. I could come to left of Lucy's here. If I click on that and make this active to give you indication that yes, you are in the right spot. So quick explanation here. You'll see the standard screen right here. You can see the map. There it is. The standard screen gives you just a little layout, different layout, large map. Left of Lucy's sister's hog farm, you can see that that is the field name here. I'm going to hang out on this metrics page for most of the time because if I've got Gen 1 and Gen 2 operators listening in or watching here, this is the most similar to what they're seeing as well. So what am I? Where am I? We've just answered that. Couple other things that I want to show from the perspective of where am I. This is also where I'm going to come. I'm going to go to Demo Client, Demo Farm, and I'm going to go to my demo field because I want to show you what happens when I make this field active. If I am going to use a prescription or a boundary to control my swath and control my seeding rates, I would assign those under the active field. So when I come into my demo farm, this is under Demo Client and Demo Farm. I'm in the demo field. You can see that there's a boundary file, row flow demo boundaries. So if I click on none, this is how it would default. It says I have no boundary. I would have to click here, and any boundaries that I have imported into that monitor, I'm going to scroll down and find the necessary boundary, and I'm going to assign it. Same thing with prescriptions. You can see under seeding, I click here and I have this row flow demo population is assigned to this particular field. So this is where I would assign my prescriptions and boundaries. So the next question is, what am I planting? So we're going to go from the home screen, setup, and I'm going to come into hybrid. If I had soybeans as my active crop, this would say soybean varieties, or if I had a different crop active, that would show up right down here. I'm going to come in and say, okay, I need to tell the system what variety I am planting. So if I come into this particular hybrid, you see 4 different colors here. That means we can record up to 4 hybrids at once as you're planting through the field. So we could record 4 different hybrids on the fly at the same time. To add a new hybrid, I come in, I can add a hybrid from a database, and I'm going to start to type one in. So I'm going to do P1197, and what you notice as I'm typing that in is it begins to narrow down my options. Normally what I want you to do is I want you to select from this actual drop-down area up here, because if I type in a P1197 ANT once, and I select that and make it active, and then I forget I did that and come back in the next field and type in lowercase P1197 ANT, the system will recognize that as 2 different hybrids, and they won't correlate together in reporting later. So it's best practice to select from that drop-down menu. Once you select the hybrid, you're going to enable that hybrid, and it's going to ask you what rows is this on. So I could tell it all, or I could say, hey, this is on the left-hand side of the planner. And then I could come into hybrid B. So notice hybrid A, this orange correlates to rows 1 through 8. Hybrid B, I can come in here and I'm going to compare that to, I'm just going to grab a random hybrid here. Let's say 6208, enable that, and I'm going to say this is on the right-hand side. So now as I'm planting, we are going to record both of those hybrid labels on their respective rows. So when you come back later and you go to harvest this, if you're using Yield Sense, this will come in and this will auto track those hybrids through Field View to correlate into yield reports very simply. The other place you can use this that's very, very powerful is, let's say that I'm going to plant this 1151 AMX. And I'm going to put this on all the rows. And I've got starter on the planner, and I'm going to run a test. So I'm going to run it dry. And then I come back on my next pass, and I could come into, I'm just going to go into hybrid B. I could go back into hybrid A. But you'll notice here that I've entered a custom hybrid. So I just go add custom hybrid, and I keep typing as long as I want, and then it'll put in a custom. So now when I enable this and I put it on all the rows, for that next pass, I'm going to turn the starter back on. And now when I come back to harvest that, it's going to label those as separate buckets, and I get very fast feedback on how effective that starter pass was. Some really powerful things you can do with that. I would encourage you, if you're going to do some trials, do that before the year starts, is enter all of your hybrids in, and then you can just select from a drop-down list. So what am I? We've answered that under the planner and equipment. Where am I? That's in the field. What am I planting? We've just answered that here. You can see that we have this, this 1151 AMX starter, and that is applying across all of the rows. And I'm also putting down a liquid starter that I've selected. The last is how much am I planting? And you're going to determine that by coming over to your set points. Any input that you have active, so if I went into my planner setup and told it I had insecticide, I would have an insecticide option over here that I can make active and put in some insecticide rates. But right now I've got seeding and I've got starter. And what I've done is I've come in and entered set point 1 through set point 8, all of the different incremental set points that I want. And I think about this like presets on a radio, if you will. Where this will show up is under your control screens. And I'll show you that in just a moment. I'm going to go over and show you starter. So I could have a 5-gallon set point, a 10-gallon set point, and a 15-gallon set point. So I'm running Furrow Jet, and I can do some pretty high rates, and I want to make those all available. I could put in up to 8 different set points. When I come to my home screen now, I come into my V-Drive controls. So any black bordered widget that you see on that page is a control indicator. When you touch there, and I apologize, sometimes this screen in the demo gets just a little bit goofy. Oops, manual and single. Okay. If I am planting under one single rate, here's my presets: 28, 30, 32, 34. So if I want to plant 36.5, I could click on 36,000. That changes me right here. And I could bump myself up by 500 seeds by just hitting plus or minus. So some important things to be aware of to change your population set points. One other thing to show, and this is just on generation 3, but if you press and hold your finger on one of those control screens, it will give you a pop-up, and you can manually touch very quickly one of these rates. You can bump it up or down. Now, I don't have a live demo running, so you're not seeing the effect, but you can press and hold and then bump up your incremental adjustments right there. So that's what am I, where am I, what am I planting, and how much am I planting? So some really important things to remember there. Now, one more thing I want to go over with what am I planting, and that has to do specifically with how do you change between crops and keep that process very simple. Because a common mistake is people will go into setup, they'll go into this planner profile, and they'll try to change all these metrics and remember how to do it, and it's usually pretty difficult to remember exactly how it was set up the same way. So what we will do is, instead of changing our settings in the planter screen here, we're going to go to crops. So here's where these changes will take place. Right now, my active crop is corn. So when I click on corn, I also have soybeans as an option. If I don't see the crop that I'm trying to plant, I'm going to come right down here to the lower left. I can go to add crop. And let's say that I want cotton to be an option as well. When I come under my active crop, you can see corn, cotton, soybeans. You can do sunflowers, sugar beets, whatever you would like. So I'm going to start with corn. I'm going to go to soybeans and just show how these two things correlate. Now, before I do that, I'm going to go to a little different planner style because it'll show the change a little bit better. I'm going to go to Setup, and I'm going to bring up a different planter or a different piece of equipment, a different equipment profile. This is an important thing to note on the Gen 3s. If you come into equipment, down at the bottom right, there is an option to save and load. And I want to stress that once you have your monitor completely set up, that you come into this equipment and save load and click on save your current planner configuration, or if it's already saved, that you click update. That's going to save all of the changes that I've done to this current configuration. And now I'm going to switch over to my, let's say this is my bean planner, and I'm going to load a Kinsey 1632. Are you sure you want to load this configuration? Yes, this is the one that I want. So quick overview on this. When I come under planter, you'll see 32 rows, 15-inch spacing, active rows are all. When I come into crops, for my soybeans, I'm going to determine, well, there's 56 holes per disc. That's very important to have correct, is you need to tell the system how many holes for the meter that you're running. If it was corn and you're running a finger meter, it'd be 12. Or if you're running, say, a brush meter for a Kinsey, you'd be, I believe, 48 or 60, depending on the brush meter you were using. Your default population says if you are using a prescription, you get out of the prescribed area, and we don't know what to command anymore. We're going to default to 140,000. There are swath coverage settings in here. There are also for split planners like Kinseys with pushers or 1790s or case 12 40s or 45s. There's different off-center distances for when you swing the hitch one way or the other if you're planting in 15-inch and 30-inch rows. So I have my soybeans set up correctly. I'm going to change this crop to corn and just show you that I have different settings in here. So seeds per disc is 27. The active rows are left and rear, or left or rear. That indicates what sensors are active. And then you can see my off-center distance, D and E, and that refers to your GPS measurements. So let me show you what happens now in your planner configuration. I come in here, 32 row, 15-inch spacing, but my effective row spacing, what I'm calculating population with, is now 30 inches, and my width is 40 feet. If I go back to my crops and now I change to soybeans, it's now changed that effective row spacing back. If I was a 31 row planter, this would change from 40 feet to 38.8 feet. And the reason I want to stress this is it's one of the most common questions that we get is, hey, how do I change crops? There's only 4 button pushes. You're going to go to Setup, Crops, change your active crop to whatever you're now planting. Change out your crop kits behind, and now you're off to the races. You're ready to go. So that answers all of our what questions. What am I? Where am I? What am I planting? And how much am I planting? So now I'm going to switch over and I want to bring up a demonstration and walk through each of the metrics on the screen to help remind you that as you begin to plant, what does all this mean and how do I use this to get the best planting pass I possibly can. Okay, now I've got my demo up. let's walk through each of these metrics just to give you a reminder of what they mean and how to utilize them. Population, singulation, and SRI, or seed release index. This is our spacing value. Let's walk through how these three are related. First of all is population. Think about population very simply as the rate. This is the number of seeds per acre that are spewing out of that backside of that planter. So I could get 30,000 population a couple different ways if that was my target. We could get 30,000 population by pulling out a tape measure, getting on our hands and knees, pushing a seed in the ground at every 7-inch mark on that tape measure. That would be 30,000 population. But we could also get 30,000 population by putting 30,000 seeds in a 5-gallon bucket, slinging them out into the field, and as long as they all fall within an acre, that is also 30,000 population. It's a bit of an extreme example, but that's all population really is it is the prescribed rate, or it is the rate that we're trying to achieve in that acre. It doesn't tell me that I'm going to have a picket fence stand. To know that I'm going to have a picket fence stand, I need two more numbers. That is singulation and spacing, or SRI. Singulation refers specifically to meter performance. So every time, let's say it's a finger meter, every time a finger rotates by, there should be one seed and only one seed under that finger. Every time a hole rotates by on a vacuum meter, there should be one seed and only one seed per hole on that disc. The grading scale that we're after with singulation is 100% accuracy. That seems a bit idealistic, but here's why. A VSET meter, let's say, should run at 99.6 and 99.7 pretty well all the time. We run the vacuum at about 20 to 22 inches, and it should nail that singulation. So why should I care if I drop from 99, let's say, to 98? And I think about it a little bit like this. If I'm planting 33,000 population and I get 1% decrease in singulation, that means that I have 330 more errors per acre. 1% of 33,000 is 330. So if I go from 99 to 98, I just introduced 330 more errors. If I go from 99 to 97, I've just introduced 660 more skips or doubles per acre. That means I have 660 partial ears. It takes 140 ears to make a bushel. I want to avoid that. I want to make sure to get that back. So the way that I'm going to use this information to help me make a decision is I'm going to, first of all, use my 3 levels of screen. So I'm going to look at singulation. I see that it's yellow, and I'm going to click on it. I can see very quickly at a glance that my problem row is row 5. So I could go to the level 3 screen for more details, but what I'm going to recommend doing is some quick swap Gnostics if it continues to go this way. We could take the box and the meter off of row 5 and flip-flop it with row 4. If the problem follows the meter in the box to row 4, we've just isolated it to the meter in the box. If it stays on the row, we know it's something interacting with the row that is causing row 5 to have skips. So this could be any wide variety of things. I've seen it be something as simple and frustrating as if you've got a latch that holds the box down and the tension of that latch is adjusted with a little nut. If that comes loose and that box back there vibrates just a little bit, you can be knocking seeds off. It might take you 3 or 4 passes of getting out of the cab and evaluating that row before you figure out the issue. But if the 2020 says it's there, I can pretty well guarantee you there's an issue. There's something causing those skips to happen. So other things to think about with regard to singulation. Let's say I'm running finger meters. A few things to think about on finger meters. Finger meters are very sensitive to the size and shape of seed that I'm running. And so I need to think about, if I've gone from a medium round seed to a large flat, do I need to get out and adjust the aggressiveness of my knockout brush if I have the capability to do so? So if I look over and I see next to singulation, this is a very useful box, skips and multiples, splitting this out. If I see that I'm at, say, 98% singulation and I have almost 2% skips, that means that that maybe that brush is too aggressive for the size of seed that I have, especially if it's a large seed. The other thing that I would look for if I'm running a finger meter is if I'm running the RPM too slow. A finger meter needs to turn between 60 to 70 RPM. And if I run that planter speed too low, especially at a lower population, it may skip. I might speed my ground speed up to speed up the meter to see if that will get rid of some of the skips. And the opposite could be true with doubles. You might want to adjust your speed down a little bit to get rid of doubles, or adjust your brush. On a meter that has, on a vacuum meter, if you're skipping, the first place to look would be vacuum. Does it need to be turned up? If you're doubling, do I need to turn the vacuum down a little bit? If you're close but still not quite there, now does that meter have some type of adjustment? Is there a knockout or a double eliminator that needs to be tweaked? And sometimes one row might be slightly different than the others. You've just gotta look and use that troubleshooting process to get you through to that point. So population, total number of seeds per acre. Singulation, that is skips and doubles. We talked about finger meters, we talked about vacuum meters, and we've talked about how to use the skips and multiples to help us tweak this and get this up a little bit higher. The last piece then is the seed release index, or our spacing value. The key to remember with this one is the lower this number is, the better. In the field, I'd like to see between about 15 to 17, maybe on the high side. If you can get it below that, that means you're grouping your seeds tighter together. Let's talk about what might affect that spacing, and then maybe we'll get into a little bit more of an explanation of what that percent actually means. There are three main things that are going to affect your seed release index. Number one is how crisply is that seed being released from the meter. So think about a vacuum meter especially. You've got a poly disc on a rubber seal, and it spins continuously, especially on a low humidity day. It will build up static electricity. And so even though the seed passes the vacuum seal and should release, if there's static buildup on the disc, you'll carry the seed a little bit too far. This is why we run E-Flow, which is an 80-20 talc graphite mix. The talc in E-Flow cuts down on static electricity and will actually improve your spacing score. The second thing that will affect your seed release index is the drive system. So if you're running electric drives, if you're running V drives, you've really eliminated most of the potential issues with the drive system. We've already pulled the shafts, the bearings, everything else. So that smooths things out quite a bit. However, if I am running a planter with, let's say, 2 hydraulic drives and drive chains, those drive chains are connected to a shaft that's connected to a set of sprockets on the shaft that go through another chain to another sprocket through a clutch to the meter. Any amount of vibration that goes through that metal drive system will affect the timing between seeds. So here's how I like to think about this. Think about this from the perspective of a seed tube sensor. In a seed tube, you have an infrared light beam that shoots through the middle of the sensor. Every time a seed falls by, that sensor breaks and it counts a seed. Every pulse equals a seed. But then what we do to figure out the timing, and whether it's a skip or a double or a misplaced seed, is we count the timing in between all of those blinks. So we might see a blink, there's a seed, 60 milliseconds later, there's another blink, there's a seed, 60 milliseconds later. Now 80 milliseconds later, we know that there's a greater distance, and by comparing other rows to each other, or by comparing to a command, we can tell you whether that was a skip or a double, or whether that was actually a seed that was just misplaced. So you could have perfect singulation, no skips, no doubles, and you could have very poor spacing. Where that might happen is where our third piece that will affect spacing really factors in, and that is your row unit ride. Let's say we take off, the rain cloud's coming, and we speed up from 5 miles an hour up to 6.5 or 7 miles an hour. What will happen now is the row units behind you begin to bounce. They begin to travel up and down, and as those row units travel up and down, the seeds compress together and they spread out in their time. Good ride is what indicates, or is an indication that can tie into this spacing number. So where we get good ride from is there are processors back on that planter. They're called single row modules if you're running a generation 3, or if you have an individual row control system. That SRM inside of it has an accelerometer. An accelerometer is the same device that when you hold your phone upright and flip it sideways and the screen direction flips from vertical to horizontal, that's an accelerometer. It's feeling a change in velocity up and down. So the faster I go, if that begins to affect how smooth that row unit is riding, we will give indication that that row unit is bouncing, and that helps us understand whether or not it's affecting our SRI, or our seed release index. So in this case, I can see yellow, it attracts my eye, I touch on seed release index, I can see it's a single row, and that tells me that the meter is performing just fine. I can look at singulation and row 3 doesn't have any problems, but something is affecting the timing of those seeds as they go down through the ground. So this could be something mechanical. There's vibration in the row unit, or there's a chain on the row that's driving the meter that's seizing up and that is vibrating. That could very much affect this. Now, I want to show you a little bit different example and another thing to be aware of if you're running this. So give me a moment as I make a change. Okay, I'm going to let my planner turn around here. I've made a configuration change in my demo. When you think about how a drive system can affect a planter, I always encourage growers that I talk to do a walk around that planter and remember where it folds and where it flexes. If it's a mechanical drive system, I want to know where it folds and where it flexes, because if I have a larger portion of that planter that is showing spacing errors, that can help me trace back to a mechanical issue. So now I look at SRI and I can see it's up at about 18.6. And when I click on that, I see that it's not one row, but it's a group of rows. Now, if I know my planter, it's 16 rows. There's 4 rows in the middle, and there should be 6 rows on either wing. This tells me that the left wing has spacing problems. And so that's going to direct me down to any mechanical component on that side of the planter. This could be a hydraulic motor. This could be the chain going from the motor to the shaft. It could be a hanger bearing in the shaft. It could be the shaft itself is bent or distorted. But this gives me visualization to help understand the planter as a whole. If it's all of the rows, now I'm inclined to believe that it's probably something correlated to my speed and the row unit ride that I'm dealing with. Now, if I'm running electric drives, again, I've taken all of that out of the picture. I'm no longer worried about that specific issue. Next, I want to go to these downforce metrics right here in the lower left. This is probably the most critical piece to set to begin with, because what this is going to do is it's going to assure whether or not I actually get to the target depth that I set with that T handle. So let me switch over, and I want to go back to my presentation just to give you a quick overview of how to set this downforce number, how to begin to understand the downforce metrics. First of all, before we can understand downforce, we have to understand depth. And understand that depth and downforce are two different metrics. They're to an AGCO planner, it would be a similar T-handle to this. But every system really works very similarly. There's some way to adjust how far the stop moves, or the relationship of a stop inside the shank to where the gauge wheel will rest against it. And when that gauge wheel comes up and it hits that stop, it's going to expose some amount of disc opener down underneath it. So when we think about choosing the depth that we're choosing, we need to think about why. And ultimately what it comes down to is we know that we're looking for moisture. To get uniform emergence means that we have to have sufficient moisture. We have to have it at the right temperature. And we want to make sure that we get that for every single seed throughout the entire pass. So you can see, for example, on the right-hand side of my screen here, where the moisture line is changing at shallower depths. But if we continue to go deeper, we've now hit a consistent moisture line. That is why we're setting the T-handle where we're setting it, is to try to achieve that uniform and proper depth. Now, something to think about. Each change on that handle is a 1/4 inch, and almost every planner works off the same principle. 1/4 inch increments at a time. If we flip this handle around, it's an 1/8 inch. But right here, theoretically, we should be at a 2-inch planting depth. The concern with this is that when these gauge wheels come up and they lock against this stop, they're now grinding back and forth through a field at 5, 6, 8, 10 miles an hour. And after we do that for a season or two, the rows begin to wear. And the problem is that not one row wears the same amount as the row next to it. And so what we always encourage growers to do is to check the wear in their depth adjustment mechanism. So I'm using the deer as an example here, but I can look right here at this indentation on the gauge wheel arm where it's rubbed against the bottom side of this stop. The stop itself pivots on a shoulder bolt. The inner diameter of the mustache is worn, and the shoulder bolt itself has actually worn. And when you compare that to a new one, you can see where this wear plus this wear plus this wear plus this wear begins to drive a very concerning depth and consistency from row to row. This would be wear on a Kinsey arm, and this is just to show that every make and model of row unit will wear, and they all need to be evaluated and adjusted. So this is how we would recommend checking this. If you take a set of 4x4s and you cut a bunch of blocks, it's easiest to do this multiple rows at a time. We're going to set the row unit down on those blocks in the depth position that we've selected where we normally always plant. We want to make sure that that handle is set in the spot where it normally will. Set the row unit down on those blocks, shake the row unit to make sure that it's settled in, and then you can use a set of fender washers, or it could be, I've used knives from a soybean head because I didn't have anything else. You want a consistent thickness of spacer to stack between the floor and the bottom of the disc opener. You're going to record the number of spacers under each disc opener, and you can determine how much wear you have from row to row to row. Last season, we had 10 planters that ran this check, and the average row to row variation was 3/8 of an inch. We had planters that were as far off as a 1/2 inch to almost 3/4 of an inch in depth consistency from one row to the next because of wear, mechanical wear. So we've got to be so careful to make sure that we check this and replace parts as necessary if we need, or you can actually choose one row as your quote unquote zeroed row and then use a paint marker to mark where each other row should be set relative to that. So you could set it a 1/4 inch difference one way, or 2 notches different another way to get them all leveled out. So a key piece to be aware of and a key piece to think about. So the next thing that we can look at is let's look at downforce relative to this. And we'll come back, we'll talk more on Furrow Moisture in just a moment. For setting downforce, once we have our depth set, now the goal is to make sure that this gauge wheel is always against its mechanical depth stop, because that means we have exposed the correct amount of disc opener. We have a load cell on each type of row unit. A Kinsey load cell is a little bit different than a Deere. A white load cell is different than a Kinsey. They all do the same thing though. They indicate whether or not the gauge wheel is locked against that stop. If I feel strain on this pivot point right here on that load cell, that means that the disc opener is in the ground all the way because the gauge wheel has reached the stop. So the first number that we're going to look at on that 2020 to evaluate whether or not we're getting to the depth that we selected is this ground contact number right here in the lower left. I want to see that number at 100% at all times if it's possible. Because what that indicates is that every seed that I'm planting is getting to its target depth. Once I've achieved that depth, now I can look at this margin number right above. And that margin number, I'm only going to use that if I'm not running Delta Force. If I'm running Delta Force, I'm going to have you ignore this number altogether. I'll talk about how to set Delta Force in a moment. Margin in a nutshell refers to how much extra weight is on the gauge wheel once we've achieved our target depth underneath. So it's an average across the whole planter, and it's a rolling average. A common question that I will get from growers that are running, say, static airbags or air force control or side springs is how much margin should I run? And I'm going to say that depends. You need to run however much margin you need to achieve 100% ground contact. Your first priority is to get into the proper depth. And then once you've achieved that proper depth, now if you can shave off a little bit of the extra weight, go ahead and do that. The challenge with this is there are forces trying to work us out of the ground, forces trying to keep us in the ground, and what we're hoping is that the forces above ground that are trying to keep us in the ground, rather, overcome the forces underneath. And what we're really concerned about is the resulting sidewall firming force. So that's what I want growers, especially growers that are running Delta Force. I want you to think in terms of sidewall firming force. And here's how we're going to set this. I'm going to recommend a few different set points for growers based off of the planter type that you have. If you are a John Deere, Kinsey, or white planter, or rather if you have a standard gauge wheel, I'm going to have you start at a 130-pound Delta Force target. And I'll show you where to do that in just a moment. If you are a Case IH with a reduced inner diameter gauge wheel, I want you to start at a 150-pound target. And this all comes back to the sidewall firming force. Now, the target that I'm referring to is if I have Delta Force on this planter and I say I want a 130-pound target, Delta Force is trying to maintain 130 pounds of force against that load cell at all times, divided between the two gauge wheels. Its goal is to never allow us to go shallow, never lose ground contact here, and to always maintain 130 pounds right here on this gauge wheel. The reason on a standard gauge wheel will start at a 130-pound target, and in my neck of the woods in central Illinois, where a lot of conventional tillage, we need some firming force to make sure we hold the trench open long enough to get the seed in and then let the closing system erase it. On a case planter, I have a reduced inner diameter gauge wheel, which means the inner profile of that wheel dives in and leaves a much looser sidewall. It's not a problem as long as I understand it's something that I want to manage too. I want to carry more weight to hold the sidewall open. So 130-pound target to begin with for standard gauge wheel and conventional tillage or strip till, and 150-pound target for a case planter. What we're going to do next is we're going to set down and begin to plant. And we're going to evaluate the map on either field view or in the Gen 3 monitor to see if we have adjusted this correctly. So here would be the example to look at right down here, this third pass that you see in the field. This would be incorrect, and this would be my greatest fear, is seeing a lot of blue with a lot of green. Blue means that we have lost ground contact, or rather the gauge wheel is not against the stop, therefore the seed is shallow, and we need more force to make sure that we're keeping the seed in the moisture line that we selected. That is our first priority. The top pass here indicates that we're always in at depth, but we're carrying possibly excessive weight depending on the conditions that we're in. This bottom side of planting shallow, we almost always lose agronomically faster than what we will if we're too heavy on the gauge wheel up top. This center pass is more what we want to see when we Downforce Map on either field view or a Gen 3. We want to see green with some yellow and maybe some red speckles, but we don't want to see any of that blue because that means we're always achieving the depth that we're after now. So step one is set your target. Step two is you're going to get out and you're going to evaluate the pass to see, does the map indicate that I'm doing the job that I want? And then step three is to make sure that we like the sidewall density that we're leaving. The agronomic concept is this, is that healthy soil should be about half solids, that's sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. In the other half, we need some pore space left in that soil. Half of that should be water, half of that should be air. If we have too much pressure down on the gauge wheels, we compact and press out this air and water, we restrict root size, we restrict microbial activity and nutrient uptake into that plant. And if we go shallow, now we don't have enough water in the equation. So a quick glance at this from the surface. You can see here on my right side, there's 100 pounds of applied weight. You can actually see that gauge wheel imprint all the way through the pass. I actually do want to see that gauge wheel imprint. If it disappears, that means that I've lost pressure on my stop. I'm no longer at depth. What I want to avoid is what you see on the left-hand side. This is a very, very hard gauge wheel imprint. I've carried more weight than I should have. And now when that corn emerges, I can see where I've created compaction and I've slowed down that seed's ability to emerge versus the other side where I had the proper air, water, solid makeup. That's what we're trying to achieve. So if I don't have delta force and I'm only looking at load pins, let's consider that for a moment, and then I'm going to switch back over to the 2020 and just show you where to make these adjustments if you are running delta force. I can look at a map like this. This is the Downforce Map. So think about like this as if you were to walk with your hand underneath the gauge wheel. This would be the extra weight that your hand would feel as the unit rolled by. On one side of this field, we're excessively heavy on the gauge wheels. That means this area of the field was softer. It took less penetrating force to get that disc into the ground, and we're actually carrying all the extra on the gauge wheels, potentially compacting the soil. On the northeast side of this field, you see the correct downforce. Now there's no control, but what this would indicate is this area of the field is a little tighter. It took more penetrating force to get that disc into the ground, and the resulting extra weight on the gauge wheels is less here than it is down in the lower left-hand side. This would be the equation, or this would be the situation where I would use ground contact and margin to make my adjustment. Make sure you're always in at the right depth, and then with margin, make sure that you're not excessively heavy. If you saw 274 pounds of margin, you could vent that airbag, you could take the tension off the spring and see, am I still in the ground? And can I achieve that without compacting the soil? We can take that same field a few years later, add hydraulic downforce, delta force control to it, and now we have absolutely nailed the control. So we can see from this green map that everything's in at the right depth, and we're always below that 200-pound range, or we're actually always within 1 to 100 pounds is what this would be. This is a good looking map, but the last thing we have to do, we set our target, we evaluate the map. Now we have to get out and dig the sidewall to make sure that we actually like what the system's doing. All a perfectly green map says is that the system is doing exactly what I told it to do. So consider dry soil for a moment. If I look at this particular clip, you'll notice as the planter begins to slow down, how the sidewall caves in behind that row unit. What that indicates is that I need more force, I need more firming force on the gauge wheels to hold this sidewall open long enough for that seed to exit to the bottom of the trench, and so I don't fill the trench in with dry dirt. So if you were to get out and you evaluate your sidewall and you see that the trench is caving in, you need more carrying force, and you would take your target of 130 or 150 and you would move it up 10 or 20 pounds to see if that improves the situation. If you're in wetter soils, this would be the other thing to consider. So this particular planter, I had split half airbags, half hydraulic downforce, and in these wetter conditions, you can see the lower side of the field. The airbag side was always shorter in stature than the hydraulic downforce side, and that was because it was carrying more weight. When I dug roots out of the shorter side, we have actually compacted those roots together. We've created a hatchet root, and we restricted yield on that plant versus where we managed the footprint across that trench and we had a perfect wagon wheel spoke. So in this particular field, in those wetter conditions, it was about a 7 bushel advantage to that better control. So what I want you to take away from this is your process. Let's go back to our 2020. Where we're going to set those targets is we're going to come down here into our delta force control. I'm in custom mode, and I can slide that to start with to 130 pounds. That's telling the system to maintain 130 pounds per row at all times, no matter what. Step 2 is to go back and to look at a map, either on field view, or I could go to the standard screen or my large map. I'm going to go to my large map. And right here you see up in the upper left, I can click on the map layer. I'm going to choose downforce, and I can see that this map overall looks pretty good. Now, if I'm on the headlands, I've got to be a little bit careful about evaluating too tightly. Evaluate this once you're in the middle of the field and you get away from the variation of all the traffic patterns on the end. But what we can see here is that overall, I've got mostly green, I've got some yellow. This blue in the middle of the field would concern me. But if we get out to the main part of the field and the majority looks like this, I'm going to say, okay, I'm in about the right range, and then I'm going to get out and evaluate the sidewall. If the sidewall's caving in, I need to go a little tighter. If the sidewall looks slick and I touch it with my pocket knife and it won't move, now maybe I want to back it back maybe 10 or 20 pounds. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're seeing applied downforce. Applied downforce is what the system is having to command, or what the system is actively doing to achieve the net result on the gauge wheel over here. So what you can see is if I click on the legend here in the lower left, this pink color indicates that we're actually lifting 50 pounds or less. This blue area says we're between 50 to 100 pounds applied, and these yellow and orange streaks indicate that we are 300 to 400 pounds. The net effect is a pretty consistent footprint, but this is all of the work that's being done to achieve the result over here. That's the difference between those two particular maps. So that gives us a pretty good walkthrough of the basic metrics on the screen: population, singulation, your spacing metric, and your downforce. Now, what I also want to pull into this is some of these smart firmer metrics that are available on that screen, beginning with Furrow Moisture. This is probably the most critical one to be aware of and to have up visible on your screen. Furrow Moisture is displayed as a percentage. And what that is that is a percentage of predicted weight gain in water for a given seed in a given area. I'll try to back up and explain that a little bit better. If I give you a small round, a medium round, and a large flat seed, they all have something in common. Once they absorb 30% of their own weight in moisture, they will germinate. So what Smart Firmer does is it gives indication that once you've achieved your planting depth, we can show that over here. Once I'm at 100% ground contact, I know that I have reached my target planting depth. This percentage moisture over here is telling me whether or not there is adequate moisture at that depth to germinate the seeds in 3 days. So my target, my goal for Furrow Moisture is to maintain 30% moisture everywhere across that field, at least 30% or more. 30% means that in 3 days, those seeds will absorb 30% of their weight and moisture and should germinate. If I fall to 20 to 25, that means that there is not adequate moisture and that I should attempt to go deeper with the depth handle itself. What I want to stress here, I've got a lot of guys that'll say, well, I just get a little bit more aggressive with the row cleaners, kick the dry clods away, and now I'm into moisture. That's maybe okay as long as we're not digging a deep trench. If we start to dig a trench, now our risk is in the presence of a rain, we wash that trench back in and we alter our depth. The better handle to move when Furrow Moisture is not adequate is to get out and go back and adjust that T handle a little bit deeper to get that Furrow Moisture reading at 30% or more. That's what Furrow Moisture is. Soil temperature, very simply, right up here is the temperature in the soil at that given time. Remember that that emergence and germination actually stops at 50 degrees. That plant's growth stops at 50 degrees coming out of the trench. So we want that number to be above 50 degrees at all times while we're planting to keep from chilling that seed or to keep from having saturated cold germ problems if we get a cold rain down the road. Now, in an ideal world, we would stop at that 45 to 50 degrees. That's more there as an indication to you to help you understand the environment that you're in so you can make a decision based off of that information. Clean furrow refers to how much residue is actually in the seed trench alongside of that seed. So if I see 90% clean furrow, what that would say is that 10 feet out of the last 100 feet of trench that we've measured with those firmers has residue alongside of the seed. If we can get that number above 95%, that's ideal, because that residue in the seed trench will wick moisture away from the seed. It will tie up resources and nutrients as it's being broken down. If it's on the surface of the soil, it will actually insulate that soil, keep it cooler and wetter. So if I've got surface residue, I can adjust my row cleaners a little bit tighter and maybe drop or increase that number by clearing more of the residue out of the way. But if I'm going to get to a certain point where I can't clean anymore, and at that point, that clean furrow number may be just an indication later on. If you look at the field view map of clean furrow, it might tell you that you need to think about how you're managing your residue in the fall or if there's a faster way to break it down in a spring, or if you want to manage it differently through strip till or something of the sort. So that's what the clean furrow number would be. Uniform furrow. Uniform furrow is actually looking at the moisture consistency, temperature consistency, how much residue is all down at the same time. So it's looking at the consistency of the sidewall being formed. If I see that uniform furrow is off, and you can click on that button and it would show you any of the rows that have those firmers. So I could click on Furrow Moisture, for instance. If I come to uniform furrow, these would be each of the firmers that I'm reading. So let's say that I see row 21 is less uniform all the time, and it's not at the moment. But that's actually going to start to tell me that there's something most likely mechanically on that row that is causing the formation of that furrow to be non-uniform. It's inconsistent with moisture and air, and in that seed potentially is going to have a hard time coming up. So I'd be checking for things like disc openers that are either seizing up or are not shimmed properly. It could be gauge wheels that are vibrating against the disc opener. Any type of mechanical complexity down on that row could cause that uniform furrow number to change. Last then is organic matter. Organic matter can be used to actually control your VSET motors if you want to control your seeding based off of the organic matter content in the field. If you're down further south where organic matter really doesn't exist, you could change that number and make that cation exchange capacity if that's a better indicator of the soil health in that area. The first and most important thing that does is it gives us very, very accurate high definition zones that we can use for future decision making, building prescriptions for seeding or building prescriptions for fertility application. We could actually go in and use that for real-time fertility application as well if we wanted to, and change that up and down. That covers most of the basic control and metrics on the 2020 screen. There's a lot more that we could go through. Reach out to your premier dealer or to our product support team, and we'd be happy to answer more of those questions. But this is meant to be just a good overview to begin you with. Two last things I want to cover. One, I want to talk through how to set swath timings. And then the second thing is I want to walk through the diagnose screen quickly and show you how to perform some health checks. So real quick process on how to go in and set your clutch timing. The first and most important thing that we've got to do is make sure that under setup and equipment that all of our planter and tractor measurements are correct. And we've already talked through that. The next thing that we have to do, and we should do this every single year, is what we call a GPS offset check. So allow me to get out of my demo for a moment here. Bear with me. Doesn't like that I've gotten out of the demo. Okay, setup, equipment. We're going to go to GPS offset check. What this test does is it allows us to compare the GPS measurements that you input into the system and compare that to what we're physically measuring in the field, or how we're modeling in the field. We're comparing the model to reality, if you will. So here's how we're going to run this test. Number one is, and here's the thing on this, you can do this if you've got a dry spell 3 weeks prior to planting. By all means, go out and do this now. You don't have to do this on the first day of planting. I would encourage you to do this sooner rather than later. Find a spot on the pasture ground or something like that. What I like to encourage guys to do is begin by snapping an AB line if you're running auto steer. Once you have an AB line set, you're going to lower the planter to the ground, and you're going to take a set of 2 flags, and you're going to place those on the furthest forward set of gauge wheels. If you are on a splitter planter, you're going to go to the furthest forward rows, to the corn rows. If you are on a Kinsey planter with pusher units, you're going to actually go to the front set, the pusher rows, to set those flags. Once the flags are set, you're going to press continue. What that has just done is it has recorded where it believes the seed exit is based off of the measurements that you have input into the system. You're going to pick the planter up and you're going to pull out and start to swing back around. Make sure to give yourself plenty of room and plenty of distance. Lock back onto your AB line and start to travel the opposite direction towards those flags. Once you're locked back on that AB line and you're traveling with the front of the tractor towards those flags in the opposite direction, when the front of the tractor gets in between the flags, you're going to press continue. That doesn't matter if it's the suitcase weights, if it's the tires up front, or the operator himself as he goes by, hit continue. All this second step is doing is it's verifying a heading change. Hey, I was headed north, now I'm going south, or I was headed east and now I'm going west. Begin lowering the planter. This is best done with two people. Have somebody outside directing you, and you want to stop that planter with the flags at the center of the gauge wheels facing the opposite direction. Once you have achieved that, you press continue. What you will have is a calculated value versus the measured values. Right up top, what you have is the center values. This is what we've input. We said it was in the center of the tractor, this B measurement, and it is indeed in the center of the tractor. The one that more commonly is off a bit is the length of the C, A, and D measurements. So if you come in and let's say that you input 264 inches, but when we ran the test, it actually calculated out to 284 inches. That would say that you're going to be 20 inches off in your modeling, and therefore 20 inches off with every swath event that you do. So this is a critical test to get right. If you do it once and it says, say you're 20 inches off, you'd want to double check your measurements, run it again, and if it is indeed correct, then you would want to come in and adjust the length by that 20 inches because we're modeling different than what you've input. One of the more common places that this will show up is if we're running a Nav2 controller on a case or Trimble system, for example. What will commonly happen is the measurements are made off of the globe, but the output is actually being output to the Nav2 controller, which is backed by this rear axle. And so in that case, we might be 30 or 40 inches off. And what we could do is very simply go into our setup and flip the GPS globe location back to that rear axle position. So once we get this test to get the measured and the calculated differences the same, now we can go out and we can plant in a cross pattern. So a couple tips on this. Bring this presentation up again and let me give a quick example. I always recommend to make this process as easy as possible by going to your rows and shallowing up the depth as shallow as you can. It is a whole lot easier to find seed on top of the ground than it is at 2 inches of depth, or at least let it be at 1 inch versus on down at 2 to 2.5 inches. If you can easily access your quick attach ketons, pull those ketons out and leave the seed on top of the trench instead of tucked into the bottom. If you can take all the pressure off the closing wheels, leave the pressure off the closing wheels and tie them up in the air. Just make it very easy to find the seed. You'll plant one direction, and then you'll come across that pass, either perpendicular or at an angle is even fine. And in that cross pattern, you will now have a stop delay and a start delay. As you enter the previous pass, this is your stop delay. From the time we said stop to the time the last seed fell, did we accurately meet our mark? And on the way out, from the time we said go to the time when the first seed dropped, did we get that timing right, or are we off? If I'm running a V-Drive VSET system, this is a very simple process to get right. Now all you've got to do is get out, dig for seed, measure the distance that you're off, and then you'll go into the monitor to enter those changes. Here's where you will do that. You would come into Setup. You would go to Systems. And in your V-Drive setup, in my case, I'm VSET Select right now, here is your calibration state. If you are running row flow on a Gen 2, I'll cover that in a moment. When I come into my calibration state, here's my start seeding offset and my stop seeding offset. This will give you instructions. Hey, make sure, confirm your GPS offsets and run that check. Don't forget those first two steps. But if we're doing our start seeding offset, and if we stopped too early, we left a gap, or I'm sorry, that would be our stop seeding offset. If we stopped too early and we left a gap, it says if you want to start or stop seeding sooner, increase the value. If you want to start or stop later, decrease the value. So I would want to decrease that value by the distance that I measured with my tape measure. It's a similar process with a row flow system, but there's an extra step in there. You need to do a seed run calibration, and that's a calibration where we're actually running motors and turning the clutches on and off to verify timing, and then we're going to go into the row flow control page and adjust timings. So again, reach out to a dealer or reach out to our cloud site for more information on where to enter those particular that particular information in. Lastly, a quick look at health checks in the diagnose page. When you go into setup, you'll notice on the Generation 3 that anywhere that you have a caution symbol, it's going to tell you that something either is not fully functional or something has not been completely set up. So if I go under Equipment, Planner Profile, it's telling me that there's something wrong here. I'm actually not a VSET Select planner. It should be a V-Drive planner. It's not recognizing something quite right. It's giving me a heads up on that. When I come into Diagnose, my diagnose screen at the end of the day should be all green. Green means that the system is recognized and fully functional. And then we want to test that system. We can do that by running through the health checks that are over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can walk through these health checks piece by piece and system by system to assure that your planter is up and ready to go. If you've got any specific questions on these tests, reach out to product support, reach out to your premier dealer. For instance, the air purge test, you're only going to run this when the system is first installed. You don't want to run this system anywhere after. You don't have to unpin cylinders. These tests on either side can be run and can be tested. But what these health checks are designed to do is test the electrical system, test the hydraulic system, and test to make sure that our commands are being accurately carried out. And you can do this in a shop setting long before you have to go to the field. So a big encouragement to make sure that you go through and do those. And I wish everybody a safe and prosperous Plant 2020 season. Thanks for spending time with me. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to all of those that took the time to watch this video. Again, our commitment here at Precision Planting is to find new and innovative ways to help farmers succeed with their planting and harvesting operations, whether they have our equipment or not. Also, please make sure to utilize the 3 links in the bio that I talked about at the beginning of the session. All 3 are great resources that you can use in preparation or during the planting season. The first is the form to receive those product support text messages during season. The second is our product support YouTube channel. And the third will take you to the Precision Planting Cloud. Now finally, we hope that you have a safe and productive planting season. Planting season comes with stress, but slowing down and considering safety for you and your family is always important during these times. Be sure to reach out to your Precision Planting Premier dealer with any and all questions. If you need help getting connected with them, please visit our website at precisionplanting.com, then go to Find Dealer in the upper right, or give us a call at 309-925-5050. Once again, we at Precision Planting greatly appreciate you investing your time to attend our virtual operators clinic. Thank you.